Hi, everybody. How are you? Hi, Dolores. Hi, Deborah. And thanks for sharing, everybody. I don't see too many comments. Deborah says, signing in for duty. Well, I won't exactly say that, but thank you for signing in. Ah, so Steve Wolfbrandt has joined. Steve Gonzo has also joined. Steve says Michael Caputo, DHS head, will resign positions citing mental health break in the pre-existing. Some people might guess that it's pre-existing. I think. So there's this great article by Dave Dayen. It's not one of his columns. It's a lengthy, in-depth think piece. And it appeared in the Prospect of the magazine he is the editor of. It's about the transition period, and the name of it is The Winter of Our Discontent. The subtitle is Projecting this. Excuse me, Bonnie is asking me to check my sound. Can everybody hear me? Please let me know if you can. I don't want to go too much further if there's anything wrong with my sound. Steve says, just finished watching Snowden on Joe Rogan's latest podcast. I highly recommend it. Thank you, Steve. Kay says, hi all. Good to see you, Kay. Okay, Bonnie says the sound is okay now. And Dolores says she can hear, so I guess the sound is fine. So I will be going ahead then. So the subtitle is Projecting the 78 Harrowing Days After the Election. And there's a sort of a drawing of a frowning Donald Trump and a health worker wearing PPE equipment. And we'll go through the article and I'll comment on it. Dave starts out by saying, this is a horror story. Maybe you think that way about the past 3 years, the corrupt self-dealing, the fusillade of lies and ignorance, the corporate handover of the regulatory state, the authoritarian repression. The oncoming election may provide you with a crack of hope for America to reverse what many consider a grave mistake, specifically the election of Donald Trump. But while Election Day will signal the end of a campaign, it's not the end of Donald Trump's term in office. 78 days from November 3rd to January 20th, known as the transition, have kept me awake at night since I started reporting out this article. The coming interregnum is likely to be one of the most politically, economically, and socially fraught periods in American history, when that could set the trajectory for the nation's future. And he quotes Michelle Obama, if you think things cannot possibly get worse, trust me, they can. And then Dave says, trust me on that as well. They will immediately after the election. He says, we have had a few catastrophic transitions in the past. After the 1860 election, 7 states seceded from the Union rather than endure under President Abraham Lincoln, who had to sneak into Washington with armed guards for the inaugural to avoid assassination plots. The 1876 election between Samuel Tilden and Rutherford B. Hayes wasn't decided till just a couple of days before the term began, with an election commission flipping 3 states to Hayes in exchange for his agreement to remove federal troops from the House, ushering nearly 100 years of Jim Crow. 1932, Franklin Roosevelt romped over Herbert Hoover and then watched banks fail. European debtors default and the economy deteriorate. Hoover refused to intervene unless Roosevelt gave up on the New Deal and accepted his policies, Hoover's policies, that is, while threatening to veto key relief measures as the country sank further into depression. Roosevelt also narrowly dodged an assassination attempt during the transition, which killed Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak. The Hoover-Roosevelt transition was so bad that Congress shortened the length of all future transitions by a month and a half. I suggest that the coming transition may be so bad that Congress then shortens the length of all future transitions so that they occur by November 15th of the election year. It may be that bad. This post-election day interregnum will be much worse. Several elements of those historic failures exist today: political disunity, economic collapse, the possibility of a razor-thin electoral margin, and corrupt challenges to the results. But none of those other transitions incorporated all that at once, and a deadly pandemic. And none of them featured someone like Donald Trump. Whether he wins, loses, or just decides that he's won, the whole nation must prepare to navigate treacherous territory this winter. Well, of course, I have nothing negative to say about that. It seems to me quite an accurate characterization of what we face. Then Dave gets into the election. Democrats have rightly preoccupied themselves with what will happen before November 3rd, not just by persuading voters, but by making sure they can overcome barriers to participation, the slowdown of the mail, Trump's threats to place 50,000 poll watchers, and even law enforcement at the polls, and the extra costs of running a safe election in a pandemic. Lay that on top of the usual voter suppression tactics, and just casting a ballot may feel like surmounting an obstacle course. Even if everyone who wants to cast a ballot in the election can, an optimistic scenario, the ballot then moves to counting. In 2018, 40% of all votes were cast either early or through mail-in balloting. The percentage in 2020 will be substantially higher due to the pandemic. Mail-in ballots in particular simply take longer to sort, verify, and move through the system. In some states, officials cannot even open those ballots until after the election concludes. Primary elections in New York City, conducted mostly by mail, took well over a month to complete, and that slow count may be an ominous harbinger for November. A collection of over 100 political veterans from the policy and campaign worlds got together in June for a, quote, tabletop exercise assembled by the Transition Integrity Project, TIP. Participants were handed various election scenarios and asked to role play actors in the system. The Trump and Biden campaigns, Republican and Democratic elected officials, career government employees, the media, and gave out their response. One of the primary findings of the exercise was the expectation of an extended counting process. We're probably not going to know the election results, and people should just go to sleep on election night, said Adam Gentleson, a former aide to Senator Harry Reid, Democrat of Nevada, and public affairs director at Democracy Forward, who participated in the simulation. Quote, but that goes against everything the media sets up, unquote. The holographic maps and slew of panelists push broadcasters towards announcing a definitive result. Somebody will be ahead once dawn breaks, but he may not be the ultimate victor. Surveys show that more Democrats plan to vote by mail than Republicans. No matter the true outcome, you can expect Trump to declare victory, but especially if he leads on election night and then falls behind. Losing an early lead with late arriving mail ballots feeds into Trump's stated contention that the only way he can be defeated is if the election is rigged against him. Some Democrats have encouraged early voting to prevent this scenario. Trump and the Republicans have tested out this strategy. They fumed at how late arriving ballots flipped outcomes in the 2018 Arizona Senate race and several House seats in California. In Florida, Trump stated that election night totals must be honored as Democrats made up ground in the late vote in campaigns for Senate and governor. The Republicans ultimately won both races. Last year, Kentucky's Republican Governor Matt Bevin cited unidentified irregularities, quote unquote, in voting after he lost a close election to Democrat Andy Beshear. Bevin called for a recanvass, which showed no changes, and he finally conceded, but not before Kentucky's Senate president intimated that the legislature could decide the race. These near misses and eventual concessions did not involve Trump's own reelection. In November, Trump's clamoring will likely be matched with unyielding tactics, both legal and extra-legal. As Brittany Gibson has detailed in these pages, Republican lawyers are already contesting rules for tallying mail-in ballots, including when they must arrive at election offices and when they require a witness signature. The Republican National Committee has earmarked $20 million for this fight, but that's likely just the beginning. At first, it will look familiar. We saw Republicans working to toss out provisional and late absentee ballots, and Democrats demanding their inclusion in the 2000 election fight in Florida. That got plenty nasty with young Republican operatives staging, quote, Brooks Brothers riots, unquote, to prevent vote counting and practically every ballot being questioned in a pitched battle. With Trump at the helm, it could become more, quote, confrontational and unmoored to truth, said Rick Hazen, election law expert and professor at the University of California, Irvine. Attorney General Bill Barr did not shut down the possibility raised in congressional testimony that the Justice Department would step in and demand that ballot counting stop. Right-wing media would amplify the rhetoric about a stolen election, and this may not play out in just one state, but several with close margins. The scenarios quickly get more extreme. Trump has alleged that any election with high levels of mail-in votes is fraudulent and cannot be trusted. Rather than quote, rather than just litigate, what if Trump tries to convince the Republican legislature to take back their power under the Constitution to appoint electors directly, unquote? Hazen explained. Quote, they would be canceling the election for president and picking the president themselves, unquote. This is theoretically constitutional in that each state has the power to choose electors in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct. In Bush versus Gore, the Supreme Court confirmed that state legislatures can legally determine electors themselves rather than via a vote of the people. Florida's legislature made preparations to do this. In fact, though the ruling rendered it unnecessary, does anyone believe that Trump couldn't convince Republican state legislatures to act on his behalf and overturn the election process? It's not clear whether governors could veto a legislature wresting control of electors. But Arizona and Florida, two key battleground states, are controlled by Republicans at all levels, so there wouldn't necessarily be a check on this activity. In Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, Republicans control the legislatures, but Democrats hold the governor's mansion. There, you could see competing slates of electors, one from each branch of government. This happened in 1876 with the Hayes-Tilden election, leading to separate slates in Florida, South Carolina, and Louisiana. Public outcry would be intense. Quote, we're talking about an intentional effort to use retroactive voter suppression and overturn a Democrat result, said Norm Eisen, a Brookings Institution fellow who served as counsel for the House Judiciary Committee in the impeachment process. Progressive activist groups are already preparing for the possibility of mass street protests using an umbrella group called Protect the Results. Trump supporters would likely take to the streets as well. Many of the TIP scenarios ended in general strikes and riots. Of course, at least until January 20th, Trump would be in control of military forces confronting protesters, as we've already seen. Well, not necessarily military forces, Department of Homeland Security forces pretending to be military forces. The military is likely, based on pronouncements since the farce in Lafayette Square, the military seems to be indicating they are going to be nonpartisan in this. If they think Trump is trying to take control of the government after he lost an illegitimate election, they may simply not obey the outgoing president and appeal to their oaths under the Constitution. Going on with the article, underlying this tumult are some deadlines. Per the Federal Election Commission, states must report results by December 8th. Electors cast their votes in the Electoral College on December 14th. The incoming 117th Congress certifies the election on January 6th. In a protracted fight, some or even all of those deadlines could be missed. State courts or the Supreme Court could get involved at any step along the way, with the Supreme's foreclosing challenges before states must report on December 8th. But in 2000, the court was able to do that with one ruling, ending ballot counting in Florida. There could be several states embroiled in by litigation with different challenges in each. The calendar becomes a factor. In addition, a resolution depends on the Supreme Court retaining authority among all participants. Al Gore's acceptance of the ruling in Bush v. Gore ultimately resolved that dispute. In one tabletop scenario, Democrats refused to accept the Trump Electoral College win if he lost the popular vote by millions, pushing to overturn certified results in states with Democratic governors. The person in the simulation making that call was John Podesta, former Bill Clinton chief of staff, and Obama counselor and Hillary Clinton campaign chair. Quote, I'm a little bit more on the lefty side of things, said Adam Gentleson. Quote again, I don't think people were too surprised that me and my team would contest the election. It had a lot of impact that Podesta would do the same thing, unquote. The result of all this is that on January 6th, there may not be a winner to certify, either because of disputed electors or different chambers of Congress accepting different slates. If no candidate definitively has 270 electoral votes, we move to a process not seen in American politics except for the corrupt bargain of 1824 and the fifth season of the program Veep, the presidential election decided in the House of Representatives. Each state would get one vote for president. Under the current partisan makeup, Republicans control 26 state delegations, Democrats 23, with one tied, the Pennsylvania delegation. The current Republican advantage gives the party an incentive to dispute the results and have friendly legislatures refuse to submit electors in states Biden needs to put him over the top. Quote, if I'm the Trump team, my goal would be to deny 270, said Gentleson, but the outcomes of the 2020 House races could shift the landscape. One Democratic pickup in Florida and a shift to the Democrats in Pennsylvania would create a tie and utter chaos. Even if a contested election ends in Biden's favor, Trump could, in theory, refuse to leave the White House or invoke some dubious, quote, emergency action, as House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn theorized, to stay in power. The timelines are constitutionally clear. The term of office ends on January 20th, and the president would move from the commander-in-chief to an unauthorized House guest as the clock struck 12 noon. But that would be uncharted territory for the nation, and a crisis not seen since the Union broke apart in the winter of 1860 to 61. Lawrence Wilkerson, former chief of staff to Colin Powell when he served as Secretary of State, participated in tabletop exercises. Quote, we found out the Constitution has so many holes in it, it's pitiful, unquote, said Wilkerson, now a professor at William and Mary. Quote, again, the only things that patched the holes over time were precedent, protocol, and decency. We have discovered in this White House that ethical behavior is utterly absent, unquote. Even with an overwhelming Biden victory that Trump would be forced to accept, he would retain immense power to undermine the transition. The 11 weeks between the election and the inauguration, Trump will retain full control of the executive branch for this period, and his cooperation will be crucial to a peaceful transfer of power. U.S. history offers plenty of examples of tolerable handovers. Obama's transition team was inside agencies within 2 days of his election victory. President Eisenhower briefed John F. Kennedy on the Bay of Pigs invasion preparations during the transition. But Trump's critics strongly suspect his attention won't be focused on putting Biden in a position to succeed. Quote, I can't imagine them cooperating at all, unquote, said Mike Lux, a veteran of both the Clinton and Obama transitions. And quote again, Trump has violated pretty much every unwritten norm out there, unquote. Some legal requirements but mitigate this possibility. The Presidential Transition Act requires that appointees set up transition teams in the White House and the General Services Administration, which Trump has accomplished. Before May 3rd, deadline, career officials, not political appointees, were put in charge of transition planning at each federal agency. During the 2000 election, the Clinton administration did not allow George W. Bush's team security clearances or office space until the outcome was decided. Wilkerson contended that these barriers had real-world impacts. Quote, no one picked up on the fact that there were people with their hair burning on al-Qaeda, unquote, he said. After amendments to the Transition Act, it's now law that by September 1st, Biden's transition team gets office space, equipment, and security clearances for designated officials. Well, it is September 1st. Has Biden's transition team gotten office space, equipment, and security clearances? I don't know. The people below Trump are doing a good job and approaching it responsibly, said David Marchik, director of the Center for Presidential Transition at the Partnership for Public Services. But Marchik remembers the 2016 transition from Obama to Trump. Then, too, the Trump team had a well-designed plan devised by New Jersey Governor Chris Christie and run by his former chief of staff, Rich Bagger. Quote, and then what happened? Trump threw it out, unquote, Marchik recalls. Trump fired Christie and showed a reluctance to have staffers attend agency transition meetings. The same thing could happen in reverse of 2020. If Biden wins, he and Trump must sign a memorandum of understanding after the election, giving the new team access to documents and entry into federal agencies. Trump could refuse to endorse the agreement. National security teams are supposed to brief their Biden counterparts. That could be canceled. But memos from agency heads to their counterparts could go unsent. Processing for approximately 4,000 incoming political appointments, including over 1,000 needing Senate confirmation, could be delayed. If you come in to talk to the cabinet officer, he won't talk to you, said Wilkerson. Quote again, you want to know the policy for Iran, the plan for taxes, there's nothing there. It's like if someone left you in the West Wing and said, welcome to the circus, dude, unquote. The Biden team, likely to be one of the most prepared to enter government in history, with a vice president just 4 years removed from the executive branch, could weather a lot of this. Ted Kaufman, the transition chair, co-authored the law that improved presidential transitions. With only 50 Senate votes needed to confirm the executive branch appointees, opportunities for quickly advancing his cabinet's elections exist if Democrats regain control. But there's a more troublesome possibility in the transition dysfunction. Trump, said Mike Lux, will be so bitter having just lost the election, he will do everything in his power to sabotage things, unquote. The veil of ignorance would allow Trump and his top officials to burrow political appointees into career service positions, keeping them in place after the transition. Quote, they will contaminate the administration throughout unless you ferret them out, said Wilkerson. And quote again, they will implement the previous administration's policies in your administration, unquote. So this all sounds awful, doesn't it? And the possibilities for immense and utter fuck-ups leaving the United States in total chaos are immense, aren't they? Don't you agree? We are headed into a very, very difficult time. Further acts of sabotage range from petty office pranks, messing with computers or phones, to far more consequential options. Trump could authorize bombings or guerrilla actions abroad before the inauguration, similar to George H.W. Bush sending Marines to Somalia in December 1992. He could turn in a final census report early, cementing congressional apportionment data in a way that would undercount communities of color. He could just destroy evidence that might be used in future investigations against him. And he could issue executive orders and change agency regulations, which could all be reversed but would take time and effort early in Biden's term. Anything that's done by rule requires rulemaking to change it, said Erwin Chemerinsky, dean of the law school at the University of California, Berkeley. Quote, given how active the Trump administration has been with regulations, it's going to take a lot more action to reverse that, unquote. The goals would be twofold. First, ideologues would strive to finish Trump's term with as many conservative triumphs as possible. Second, as Trump views practically everything as zero sum. Entangling the early Biden term with hardships would give credence to his likely post inaugural message of a failing new administration. An uncooperative transition would, of course, come at the worst possible time. The economy remains severely depressed from the fallout of the pandemic and the continued inability to allow large numbers of people to congregate. There remains no agreement on another coronavirus relief package, and Trump's executive actions are already proving next to meaningless. Even if a deal is reached, most of the relief in the current bills extends only to December, leaving weeks with Trump as president and no fiscal support for the economy in place. The combination of economic pain and uncertain election and public health challenges could roil markets while mass evictions and foreclosures ensue. Like Hoover, Trump could threaten to veto any economic relief in the 11-week stretch, or even potentially shut down the government if no long-term budget agreement emerges. Governing of any kind would grind to a halt. In one sense, this would suit Democrats just fine. They don't want to see Mitch McConnell's Senate filling every judicial vacancy or having a say in coronavirus legislation. If the chamber will switch to Democrats on January 3rd, the goal for Democrats should be to do as little as possible in the lame duck section, unquote, session, said Adam Gentleson. But Trump isn't likely to have a governing impulse anyway. He is instead overwhelmingly likely to focus the transition on self-enrichment and self-preservation. What if the lame duck Trump administration signs government procurement contracts that give preferential treatment to his own properties? What if Trump makes deals with other countries along the same lines for their U.S. visits or alters foreign policy in exchange for emoluments? What if he directed emergency coronavirus relief funds to Trump hotels on the barest of pretenses? What if he set a price for doling out pardons or regulatory relief? The Trump Organization has already billed the government $900,000 for travel and lodging during his presidency. Imagine Trump moving to Mar-a-Lago for the transition to transfer more public dollars over to his business. The kinds of naked looting, which he's done more slowly, he could do now more aggressively, Eisen has mused. Trump has demonstrated over and over again, it's not America first, it's Trump first, unquote. That leads to the unique power presidents have availed themselves of habitually at the end of their terms, the pardon. Trump could pardon anyone and everyone involved in nefarious schemes throughout the course of his presidency. Jared Kushner, Donald Trump Jr., Michael Flynn, whomever. One scenario in a tabletop simulation involved Trump pardoning Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden's son Hunter, just to create suspicion around their wrongdoing. Whether Trump can pardon himself is constitutionally unclear, as it's never been tried before. What would be legal is a bizarre scenario laid out by Erwin Chemerinsky. Quote, at 11:45 a.m. on Inauguration Day, you can have Trump pardon Pence and then resign, and Pence pardons Trump, unquote, he said. Quote, there's no limit on the pardon power in the Constitution, unquote. This would not protect Trump or his cronies from state legal action, but Trump could make a final deal with the incoming president. He will only peacefully accept election results and leave quietly if Biden and congressional Democrats agree to end all investigations and encourage state prosecutors to act accordingly. If there's legal immunity available, Trump is exactly the type of person inclined to take it. In other words, even in the relatively calm scenario of a standard transition, we could see kleptocracy and immunity on an accelerated scale, said Larry Wilkerson, quote, those 78 days worry me as much as the days before, unquote. And that's before you get to the virus that will have killed over 200,000 Americans by Election Day. And on that note, I want to point out, before we get into the virus, that the total as of today for the virus, let me refresh my page here. On the Worldometer site, okay, on the Worldometer site, we have now reached, as I believe I said on Saturday we would, we have now reached 200,197 fatalities for the United States. This, of course, is 50 days before November 3rd? So 200,000 not by November 3rd, 200,000 by September 15th. And we have also reached 604 deaths per million. We are now 9 behind the UK, which is at 613 per million. By the way, just yesterday we were at 601. We were 12 behind the UK yesterday. What was yesterday? 600. I forget. But we're closing in on the UK very fast. They've been ahead of us in deaths per million for ages and ages and ages, and we are about to surpass them. If things keep going the way they are, by next weekend, we will have exceeded 613 deaths per million. Now, other nations will still be ahead of us. Ecuador continues to move very fast. They're at 619. Brazil's at 626. Chile's at 629. And Bolivia's at 632. Spain is at 642 since its recent spike, but not moving as fast as the others. And Belgium is at 856. They're not moving very fast, though. They're very slow. Peru is moving very fast, and they are number one in the world of nations of any appreciable size, and they are at 935 deaths per million. We're not as bad as they are, but we are pretty bad, and we are moving fast. Anyway, back to Dave. The virus. The virus could loom larger as the leaves begin to fall and a chill hits the expert. Yes, it could loom larger because it's already at 200,000. We have the simulation for the Institute of Health Metrics that predicts by the end of the year we'll have 400,000 dead. We certainly could have 300,000 by election day. The way we're going, it's perfectly possible we'll have 300,000 by election day. And using the measure that compares deaths last year with deaths experienced, but this year, that figure may well be 375,000 by election day. Anyway, the pandemic could loom larger as the leaves begin to fall and a chill hits the air. Experts have always warned of a resurgence in autumn, in winter. And by the way, I must remind you at this point, I'm reminded to remind you at this point that I have posted 2 new progressive short takes. Specifically, my short take on Trump lied, 200,000 Americans died. And that particular short take, which is not really that short, uh, goes through how the various states are doing. Now, let me double check that. I'm not sure that's the one about the second wave. I have one about the second wave also coming up, but no, I haven't posted the second wave yet. I posted two videos. One is Bernie would have been way ahead by now. That's a progressive short take. And I posted one called Trump Lied, 200,000 Americans died. So those two have been posted. Tomorrow I'll post one called The Second Wave of COVID-19 in America. And that one examines the possibilities of a second wave. And to make a long story short there, the graphs of RT, the rate of the reproduction, of COVID, are showing the appearance of a second wave in the New England states and the Mid-Atlantic states right now. It's showing that right now. So going back to the article, to Dave's article, that shows that we may be looking at a second wave already starting. Viral spread is more favorable both in lower temperatures and in poorly ventilated indoor spaces, which cooler weather forces people into. Case counts and deaths finally started to fall toward the end of August, but remain stubbornly high, and the return to schools and campuses could keep infections elevated in the coming months. Dr. Redfield, director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has already warned of the worst fall in U.S. public health history that augurs an even worse winter. On top of that, the normal epidemic we always face at this time of year looms. Influenza. Last year's flu season, based on early estimates, led to as many as 56 million cases, 740,000 hospitalizations, and 62,000 deaths. Flu season starts right around the election and during the potential transition. Yes, it does. And there's a possibility people can get flu and COVID at the same time. Bonnie and I have already taken our flu shots, which have always been effective for us in the past. This creates several problems simultaneously. Given the similar symptoms, it's harder to distinguish between diagnoses of the flu and COVID-19, each of which have different treatments and practices. Quote, if you walk into the ER with flu, you're put aside, unquote, said Greg Gonzalez, professor of epidemiology at the Yale School of Medicine, unquote. But with COVID, you've got to get people into isolation, unquote. Misdiagnosis, therefore, could increase spread. Meanwhile, hospitals are already strained to find enough intensive care beds for flu patients every year. Added to coronavirus patients, systems could be overwhelmed. There are some signs of hope. The same social distancing measures and mask usage that mitigate the spread of coronavirus also tamp down flu infections. Countries in the southern hemisphere where winter has commenced report practically no flu cases this year and sharply declining numbers for other respiratory ailments like pneumonia. But most of these countries never had out-of-control COVID-19 infections like the United States, which shows that social distancing only goes so far here. And those same precautions may also prevent people from getting flu shots, making communities more vulnerable. The CDC has purchased millions of additional doses of the flu vaccine, and handed out funding to states to carry out stronger interventions. Health officials have urged Americans to get shots as soon as they're available to minimize a double epidemic. Quote, getting vaccinated early will protect you earlier and take pressure off the system, unquote, said Jim Blumenstock of the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, ASTO, a coalition of chief health officers, and quote again, that's the campaign we're messaging now. Get it early, unquote. But the flu shot isn't the vaccine Americans are anticipating. They're waiting on a vaccine for coronavirus. When we will have that is anyone's guess. Right now, several experimental vaccines have advanced, and the Trump administration has repurchased hundreds of millions of dollars from doses from 6 different manufacturers. The initiative, known as Operation Warp Speed, has accelerated vaccine production by absorbing the development costs. But the skeptics of a speedy resolution have warned of a Trump, quote, October surprise, unquote, where he announces a vaccine breakthrough prior to the election. Its Republican convention acceptance speech, Trump promised that his administration will, quote, produce a vaccine before the end of the year or maybe even sooner, unquote. The plausible fear is that Trump, seeking electoral advantage, would rush a vaccine to market before its efficacy and safety are confirmed, distorting the scientific evidence and overruling or intimidating experts. Quote, everything is in place to do it right, said Gonzalez. Quote again, the only thing wrong is if the president interferes with the approval process. For his part, Food and Drug Administration Commissioner Stephen Hahn has said definitively that efficacy would not be sacrificed for speed. But already there are reports that the White House has pressured the FDA for an October rollout. The FDA could potentially issue an emergency use authorization for a vaccine before trials conclude. As the Financial Times has reported, could be in the works for a UK option developed by AstraZeneca and Oxford University. Claire Hannon of the Association of Immunization Managers, it's a coalition of state and territorial directors, said that her organization has, quote, been told to be ready in October, unquote. In the past few months, 2 therapies, anti-malaria drug hydroxychloroquine and convalescent plasma have been given emergency use authorizations. Hydroxychloroquine ultimately proved less than useful and even harmful. The plasma authorization came right after Trump angrily tweeted that the, quote, deep state, unquote, was delaying treatment approval to destroy his reelection chances. The FDA has denied political influence, but it's hard to avoid that conclusion. If this scenario is repeated with the vaccine, Trump would be putting not only individual recipients at potential risk, but the entire immunization process. The reality is that you can only accelerate vaccine development so much, particularly at the critical phase 3 trial stage, which several manufacturers are currently engaged in. Quote, the trials currently planned are for 30,000 people, said Paul Olfit, director of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia's Vaccine Education Center and part of a vaccine group at the National Institutes of Health and the FDA. Olfit explained that those people must be recruited and split into vaccine and placebo groups. All the vaccines in trial require 2 shots, spaced out as much as a month apart. Then you have to wait a couple of weeks for the immunity to kick in and observe for symptoms until there are a sufficient number of visible COVID cases from the sample. The data isn't useful. There would, quote, there would have to be a clear efficacy signal, he said. Trump may not be keen to wait. The understatement of the year. Meanwhile, just announcing the vaccine sets off what will be the largest logistical project in the history of mankind. Billions of doses would need to be manufactured and distributed worldwide. and all the elements for production, active ingredients and chemicals, sand to make the glass vials, syringes, far-flung materials like horseshoe crab blood and shark livers, something called the vaccinia capain enzyme, are required in large quantities. Officials will need to decide what populations get the vaccine first, how to get multiple vaccines from the multiple manufacturers delivered safely nationwide under the extremely cold temperatures needed for storage, whether healthcare provider locations need to be supplemented with pop-up vaccine clinics, how to protect workers administering the vaccine when the disease is still contagious, how to differentiate COVID vaccine shots and flu shots that could be needed simultaneously, how to reach vulnerable people without a doctor or insurance who need the vaccine, how to ensure that hundreds of millions of people getting one dose come back for the second, and how to track inventory and delivery so there isn't vaccine wasting away on a shelf. This will necessitate extreme levels of coordination across multiple manufacturers, federal and state government agencies, tens of thousands of healthcare providers and vaccine distributors, private and public sector shippers and logistics specialists, and even the military. According to the initial planning, the existing infrastructure for federal dispersal of immunizations, known as the Vaccines for Children program, inoculates a few million children per year. COVID vaccines could increase the scale 100-fold. Many of the key decision makers are career bureaucrats who serve no matter who is in power, but the leadership at the top will play an undeniable role. And the last people you would trust to execute this well would be in a Trump administration consumed with clinging to power post-election. Furthermore, there's no way vaccine dissemination would be complete by January 20th, even if it starts before then. So the Trump team, if he loses, will have to hand off this massive undertaking to Team Biden. Counting on Trump to cooperate on that is dubious. It will be impossible enough with dedicated leadership, let alone with dilettantes or with people who want to deliberately sabotage it. How the vaccine process plays out from the outset will be critical for the future of public health. Any kind of problem, well-connected individuals able to jump the line and get the vaccine first, a breakdown in the delivery, like with H1N1, when manufacturing problems caused inadequate initial supply, and then a massive excess of doses, a rushed product that fails to fully work or sickens people, or profiteering among the manufacturers will sap the public trust needed to pull off something like this. Experts stress the need for open, truthful communication throughout every step of the process, not exactly a Trump administration hallmark. A busted COVID vaccine rollout would feed into a public conversation already given over to conspiracy theories and distrust of government. Undisclosed side effects or other problems would give significant oxygen to the anti-vaxxer movement. And if people stay away from the vaccine, it's harder to reach the herd immunity needed to protect the public. Quote, our national experience with COVID-19 has created a situation of low public trust and high public anxiety, said Kelly Moore, a former director of the state immunization program at the Tennessee Department of Health, now a professor at Vanderbilt University. Lowering that trust and heightening that anxiety would be disastrous. You can see it would be. A previous October surprise testifies to the potential downside. In February 1976, a novel strain of the swine flu cut through the military outpost at Fort Dix in New Jersey. President Gerald Ford, facing re-election and fearing a pandemic, sprung into action with a vaccination program which rolled out doses by October. News outlets published pictures of Ford himself getting a shot, and 45 million were vaccinated. but the government used a live virus, quote unquote, that led to hazardous side effects, with 450 people incurring the Guillain-Barré syndrome, which causes paralysis. Meanwhile, the swine flu only induced mild effects and quickly died out. The vaccines were delivered, and hundreds were paralyzed for nothing. The swine flu debacle gave fuel to skepticism about vaccinations and made people wary of annual flu shots. The botched vaccine had public health impacts for decades. That's what's at stake with getting the COVID vaccine right, and why putting the decisions in the hands of a self-absorbed president, he should have said a self-absorbed tyrant, more consumed with poll standing than life-saving, is so dangerous. None of these scenarios have to happen, and knowing about them is the first step to preventing them. Quote, my advice would be to have every worst case scenario plotted out now, unquote, said Mike Lux. Quote, if you're doing that at the moment that it's happening, it's too late, unquote. That means Democrats educating the public that the vote simply won't be completed on election night, and securing the resources to carry on for months. It means promoting early voting to minimize the blue shift. It means political leaders bolstering state election officials' ability to do their job responsibly. It means recognizing the potential for massive street resistance to the most extreme possibilities. It means Biden transition officials gathering whatever information they can about government operations if Trump cuts off communication. It means trusting and empowering career public health officials at the state level to do their job with the utmost transparency. Still, even the most precise strategizing will overlook some possibilities. Nothing about it is perfectly knowable, and each crisis folds in on itself. Bad turns in the coronavirus fight will make it impossible for the economy to rebound. The political crisis will create economic uncertainty and distract from the virus fight. America's adversaries have occasionally viewed political transitions as moments of opportunity as the political leadership turns inward, while the coronavirus isn't sentient and America's adversaries not typically residing inside the White House. You could see the dynamic at play. Quote, this could be the 1918 flu meeting the Great Depression, meeting a right-wing revolution, unquote, Gonzalez said. Quote, it'll already be a bad situation this winter, even if things go well politically. But if we're not going to see any leadership, we're walking into a wall of fire, unquote. So that is the best article on the potential transition that I have ever seen by far, okay, until now. The most complete in looking at the scenarios and thinking about the scenarios and informing you about the scenarios and the possible difficulties and the possible pitfalls. It's so important. It warns us, okay, on how to be ready. I want to make a comment now on the blue shift, on minimizing the blue shift. We have to turn as much as we can to early voting in this, getting your votes in so they are accounted by Election Day or soon thereafter, as possible. The longer the counting goes, the more Trump will claim a fraud, and the more his people are likely to believe there is a fraud. But if we can get the early votes in as much as possible and we can minimize the blue shift, then we have at least some defense against that kind, okay, of possibility. Also, notice how familiar the possibility of a blue shift is to people inside of the Trump administration. Very recently, in the last election, which took place in Bolivia, Evo Morales won the election, but not on election day. The initial counts did not show that he was a decisive winner. Then they started counting the mail-in votes, and the United States managed the coup by having the OAS doubt the votes that were late in coming in, that were counted late. Okay, and the OAS found that there was reason to believe that those votes were fraudulent because the shift towards Evo Morales was not something that they considered to be natural. Now, this was not an honest mistake on their part. In previous elections, there had been that kind of shift because the votes of the Indian populations come in later in Bolivia. So the OAS knew that, but the Trump administration wanted to rig that election to get rid of Evo Morales. And they prevailed upon the OAS to game the system in that way, and they did. And Evo was displaced, and this led to the Bolivian coup, okay, and to the rule by basically right-wing fascists now. And months later, the OAS and the New York Times revealed that there had been no miscount in that election, and that the legitimate winner really was Evo Morales. But of course, the government was in the hands of the fascists then. And Evo had gone to Mexico and then to Argentina and couldn't come back into Bolivia. And so the government is now in the hands of fascists. And the social revolution and economic revolution being conducted by Evo Morales is over through manipulating the election returns in this way. The Trump administration has got to be thinking, if it could happen in Bolivia, why don't we do the same thing here in the United States? Discredit the blue shift. I'm sure that's one of the surprises, not an October surprise, but a November surprise or December surprise the administration is planning, along with lots of other surprises. What can be done? There's more for Nancy Pelosi to do. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is disgraceful in terms of how she's been handling this and what she's been doing. She has to impeach Trump again. She has to impeach him again. Okay, now I have another new video, short take, that I'm about to put up, most probably tomorrow. Tom Hartman has an article out on Trump's committing what amounts to negligent homicide in his actions that have led to the death of 200,000 Americans. Nancy Pelosi should be impeaching Trump for negligent homicide. She should make that case over the next couple of days in no uncertain terms and not take long about it. Do it very quickly. Do it very quickly and deliver it to the Senate. Okay, the Senate has to take up the case. They have to hear it. And the people from the House sent over to make the case can easily make the case for negligent homicide because of the Woodward tapes. The Republicans will try to fight against it. But if they don't convict Trump on those grounds, their last chance to retain the Senate leaves. It leaves. If they defend Trump again, in the face of that, in the face of 200,000 Americans, then they're really going to get burned at the polls. They're going to be afraid to do this. So many Republican seats are on the cusp now. As many as 14 Republican Senate seats are on the cusp now. I don't think the Republicans are going to be able to stand against the pressure of another impeachment effort put in right now. Right now. Now the Republicans will scream, this is a distraction, that we've got to have a relief bill before the end of the fiscal year. And what are the Democrats doing? All Nancy Pelosi has to do to reply to that, say, look, we stand ready to negotiate a relief bill right now. We stand ready right now. We have the HEROES Act, and you have your miserable little bill that you passed. Let's get together. Okay, and let's hash it out. And let's pass a relief bill, a real relief bill, and put it on Trump's desk by by September 30th. Let's put it on his desk. Okay? And then you can take up the impeachment proceedings after that. Then let's see what Trump does with that relief bill. Let's see what he does with that particular relief bill. Why am I suggesting impeachment? Because if we could possibly get Trump out of there now, if we could possibly do that, we can probably cut short all the shenanigans that will follow. Because Pence can be put under great pressure himself. An impeachment case that's made against Trump can implicate Pence as well. Not that I'm asking Pelosi to impeach Pence at the same time. But if that ends up hanging over Pence himself because of evidence turned up in the impeachment trial, of Donald Trump, then at that point, Pence is unlikely to engage in any shenanigans himself. And he's likely to just be very quiet about the transition after that. The point is, we have to get Trump and Barr out of there for the transition period if we possibly can. I think Pelosi has got to go to impeachment again. If I were her, I would already have done that. I would have done that last week when the Woodward tapes appeared. I would immediately have done that and started the ball rolling on that in a very aggressive way. Instead, she's home eating ice cream. Haagen-Dazs, whatever the hell she eats. Anyway, I'm doing the progressive short take on Thom Hartmann. I've done it already. I'm going to post it up tomorrow. And then I'm also going to post another one on a second wave of COVID-19 in America. Anyway, those are coming attractions. I want to turn to your comments now. But you can see these possibilities for those 78 days are just incredible. We need to do everything we can to put a stop to that. And Dave hardly even mentioned the post office shenanigans in this. But I think the Democrats have to start fighting now in order to stop this crap from happening. So, I'm going to turn to your comments now and find out what you think. So there we go. Oops. So not too many of you have hung in here, but thank you, those who have. Steve says, sounds okay, little background noise, but it's okay. Steve says, 2020, it was the best of times, was the worst of times. No, actually, it was just the worst of times. Yes. But Dave Dayen had a piece on Rising today, too, says Kay. Yeah, I haven't seen his piece on Rising today yet, but he's got a lot of great stuff. And Steve said, nobody's going to accept the results of this fiasco. Martial law awaits. And Kay says, I hope not, Steve, but you might be right. Steve says, Whitney Webb is well on the political vigilante, Kay. And Kay says, MSM News ought to not cover any of it until all votes are counted everywhere. Nah, you're asking them to give up a payday, Kay. They never give up any payday. If there's money involved, they take it. Kay said this could be the cluster, you know what, of our lifetime. Shake my head. Matt Waldy says, the Democrats knew this but decided to nominate Biden. I mean, we all would have bought the Buttigieg or Klobuchar. Just realize this is what the oligarchs want. I don't know if we all would have bought either Buttigieg, okay, or Klobuchar. Also, Buttigieg, okay, and Klobuchar could not have won on Super Tuesday. If everybody had united behind them, they wouldn't have won on Super Tuesday. They wouldn't have gotten the black vote in Texas. No way. Kay says, I didn't like either of those, Matthew. Bernie was my pick. Yeah, Bernie is Matt's pick, too. My pick. The Democrats are bumping Greens off the ballots in many states as well, making things even more complicated. Matt says, the amount of turmoil and upheaval this will cause, the oligarchs don't put their power in threat without a reason. Steve says there's a tape out today of Harris stating that she is running for a Harris-Biden administration. Seriously. Ridiculous. Steve says, wow, Joe, that's like 1,000 different permutations. Yeah. Barbara says he won't. He'll send terrorist groups to destroy peaceful protests. He sees this as powerful. His screwball. Yeah, his terrorist troops. There won't be enough terrorist troops. Okay, you have to realize, if every city in the United States stirs at once, the big ones, the little ones, all across the United States with protests over this, there aren't enough troops. There are only 75,000 troops in the Department of Homeland Security and related areas that are under Trump's control. He doesn't necessarily have the military. He doesn't have General Milley. He doesn't have the chiefs of staff. 75,000 troops are not enough. They were not enough to control Iraq, of course. We needed a lot more than that to control Iraq, and these aren't real troops. These are just DHS people. Sure, they're rough customers, but there are enough veterans out there, real trained soldiers, to possibly counter them if things get rough. Many more than 75,000 vets out there who know what to do. They're in the millions. And a lot of them have no use for Donald Trump. Yeah, I know we're talking the possibility of civil war. That's what we got, the possibility of civil war. That's the situation Trump has put us in. Kay says, I just hope Biden does not concede too early. I don't think Biden's going to concede at all. That's not what's been happening in these gaming things. Biden's been sticking in till the end. I think he knows that Gore put us into difficulties by conceding. Barbara Wernick said, the virus hasn't hit its triumph. It's coming. Every expert says a fall resurgence, is imminent. Okay, if you look at the video I have coming out on the second wave of the virus, shortly, you'll see I go over the RT statistics, the reproduction rate of the virus. It's geographically centered now. Geographically centered in states that have had big outbreaks before. It's a stretch from the tip of New England down through the mid-Atlantic states, perhaps ending in Virginia. But though Virginia is one of the least worst of these states, but still, the appearance of new cases in Virginia has been appreciable now for some time. The reproduction rate is too high. The cases are continuing to increase. A fall resurgence is imminent in New England and in the mid-Atlantic states, starting with New York and going south to Virginia. All the states, are implicated. After that, of course, that's going to spread to a lot of other areas in the United States which have controlled it by now. I mean, Texas has been doing pretty well lately, declining cases. Even Florida has not been doing too badly, though Florida's not too good either. But other states that were hot before have gotten things under control. But this thing comes in waves. It comes in waves. The second waves just haven't started in these other areas. They will come. I mean, things are bad out in the Dakotas now. They're bad. Kay says, in 2000, when I went to bed, Gore was the likely winner. When I woke up the next day, it was Bush. Hated that. We could have a whole different economy now if we had Gore back then. Yeah, we might not have had the Iraq War if we had Gore back then. We might have just contented ourselves with Afghanistan and not gone into Iraq. And we might have gotten a much quicker start on the climate crisis. Kay says, I had to get flu shots all the time back in the 70s, early 80s when I worked in healthcare. But before it turned into sick care, I don't really even trust flu shots anymore, as I know too many people from all over the country who got the flu from the ones they were given last year. Barbara says, never had a flu shot, but I'm conflicted now. I saw people who had, quote, the flu shot and got sick. We've never gotten sick from our flu shots. Kay says, I got the shots when healthcare was good. That's the diff. Barbara Wernick says, I won't take a vaccine. Okay, well, it's a personal choice. That's all that I have to say about it. It's a personal choice. If enough people don't take the vaccine, however, then the disease is not going to die out, most probably. Kay says, people who have the experience in good nonprofit healthcare don't see the diff like I do. Sick care killed my late hubby in front of my eyes. He didn't understand my problem with it. I couldn't go to the doctors with him because I complained too much. Shake my head. Laura says, I won't either. Kay says, I doubt I will either, Dolores and Barbara. And Kay says, doctors like to pass out oral steroids for everything anymore. They don't tell you they kill your immune system and can make you diabetic too. You don't want to get a COVID vaccine if you're on steroids, okay, for anything. Uh, we are not on steroids. And Kay says Pegosi needs to go see. Yeah, I'm sorry, she needs to go. And Barbara says, but Pelosi is a complicit player to the Trump campaign. I know, she's awful. Steve says, there's no more stomach for impeachment. She blew it the first time. Kay says, Trump and Pence are complicated. Barbara says she blew it for a reason. Games are being played. We need to pass. Yes. And Kay says Tom Hartman was wearing a mask inside his home studio today because of the heavy smoke out there today. Couldn't keep it out of his house. Amazing. Steve Wolfbrandt. Joe Rogan has invited Biden and Trump to debate on his show. Trump accepted. Biden did not. But Biden cannot perform in that environment anymore. That may be very true, but I'm going to tell you something. That doesn't mean that Biden cannot perform as president anymore. Those are not the same thing. Trump, okay, is a showman. He's a master at putting together any number of totally unrelated points and seeming to create, okay, a narrative about them. Many people can see that it's no narrative at all, that it's a bunch of baloney. But Trump has that particular technique down. Unfortunately, Biden doesn't. But that technique can work in a debate if people don't know how to counter it. Barbara said, same as Hillary. We were rigged, but your vote was stolen. What I'm basically saying here is just because Biden can't function in a debate setting in the same way Trump can, doesn't mean that Biden has to enter that particular setting. There is nothing that says that Joe Biden has to take on Donald Trump in a debate. I mean, we can point out all we want, and people will, that Joe Biden is chicken. He's afraid of losing a debate. But whether he loses a debate to Trump or not, that doesn't mean he wouldn't be a better president than Trump. I mean, to be a better president than Trump is a very low bar. All he has to do is end the coronavirus crisis, healthcare crisis, and the economic crisis. And Biden's got a very good chance of ending that because, one, he would listen to the scientists. Two, he would have Ron Klain to manage the pandemic crisis for him. He wouldn't have to manage it himself. He'll have a very good manager who's done this before to handle it. Kay says, this virus changes. It's so hard to treat. Actually, there's more and more success in treating it. There are fewer and fewer fatalities among those who get it because slowly doctors are learning better techniques for mitigating the effects of the virus once you catch it. Steve Gonzo says, ice is a uterus collector. Kay says, by the way, Joe, Kay says, what did Kay say? Sorry. By the way, Joe, I saw Virginia is now starting with evictions now. I haven't run into that yet, that the state is starting to allow them. I think it's a mistake. Barbara says, New York, New England, serious, yes. Barbara says, Biden can perform, okay, as president. Well, neither can Trump. Now, Trump is not performing, okay, as president now. He's not performing as the president of a democracy. He's performing as someone who's trying to create, okay, a dictatorship. I agree Biden can't perform well as president of the United States. I don't expect him to perform well. But I expect that he will be able to get someone in there who can handle the virus crisis and can bring the economy back to a far better state than it is in right now. I believe that he can do. And that, as that's happening, we can place him under pressure to do more, and he can bring in other people to do more. A lot's going to depend on us and how we build our own movement. Kay says Rogan might put Trump in his place too if he does go. Yes, Joe Rogan might well really put Trump in difficult situations. And Joe Rogan can handle Trump. I mean, any day in the week, he can handle Trump. But I think that Trump is making this challenge himself because he knows very well Biden's not going to take a chance on it. I mean, why would Biden? He has a substantial lead in the polls right now. Why would he accept the challenge and take on the unpredictability of such a situation? Steve Manzo says Trump got pedo Biden trending and sparked hashtag pedo Trump to trend. Steve says the American people deserve to see the two contestants head to head. Why not? Because something could happen to Biden in that particular contest, and as a result, Trump could catch up and win the presidency. And I am telling you, Steve, we cannot afford to have that happen. If we do, we're looking at the equivalent of the Italy of Benito Mussolini or worse. Now, maybe you want to live on that kind of under that kind of regime, but I don't. And I'm pretty sure that Joe Biden is not going to be a Mussolini. He might be as bad as Obama, but he's not going to be a Mussolini, and he's not going to stop us from organizing and building our movement. So yes, I don't want to see Biden lose. I think Biden is easier to fight than Trump. If Trump is elected again within 6 months, you could see bona fide secret police on the street all over the United States. We have a situation where the judiciary has now been corrupted. We need a situation where we can take over the Congress. We're not going to get that if Trump gets in again. The American people deserve to see two people in a contest, not two people in a debate. There is no case to be made that there is an obligation for two contestants to debate. There is no obligation unless the American people make it one. In this situation, the American people ought not, to make it one, because Trump has already proved, he is not fit or qualified to be the president. If Biden proves that he seems to be not qualified because he's not able to stand up to Trump, in a one-on-one type of a debate with Joe Rogan moderating, what does that prove? It doesn't prove that Biden isn't a better choice. Laura says, Biden is a warmonger and will start another war, the military-industrial complex. is counting on it. Okay. Dolores, Biden might start another war, or he might not start another war. I don't know whether he's going to start one, okay, or not. There is a chance he'll start one. There's also a chance Trump's going to start one. There's a very good chance Trump is going to start one in Latin America, that he's going to go after Venezuela. A very good chance. And Venezuela will be well defended by its people. Very well defended. If we get involved there, it will be a very tough war. Trump probably thinks it's going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. I mean, they have community by community National Guards trained in the use of weapons, trained for guerrilla war if necessary, block-to-block war if necessary. That is not going to be good for the United States. Trump may start a war with Iran yet. He hasn't started one yet, but he's come close. He may yet start a war with Iran. You cannot say he won't. I mean, you can't be sure he won't. He hasn't done it thus far because he didn't want to screw up a good thing. He thought he had his re-election based on the economy. He didn't want to start a war, okay, and jeopardize it. I mean, why should he? Okay, but now, with COVID around, he might want to start one. It depends. But let's talk war for a minute. It's very likely by the end of the year, as we're seeing, that 400,000 Americans will have died. When is the last war that killed 400,000 Americans? When is the last war that killed 100,000 Americans? When is the last war that killed even 50,000 Americans? It was some time ago. It was some time ago. Trump has already killed more Americans than all of the warmongers put together since all the American warmongers put together since the Second World War. That's a fact. Okay, and Dolores says Biden will get the BS in Syria. And other places rolling again. He probably will. And that's probably going to cost some U.S. troops. It's probably going to cost some U.S. troops. He's going to get bullshit in the Middle East started again. And our people will be fighting again. And Kay says, I agree Joe Rump must go. He is. Steve Gonzo says, Schumer's fast-tracking 7 Trump judges. Schumer is so full of shit, I can't believe it. Why is he doing that? What is wrong with Schumer? They should be giving Trump an inch now. Kay says, we need to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. If Rump gets in, those of us who depend on those are F exclamation point CHED. I think that was supposed to be a K in there somewhere, K. And Medicare and Medicaid, if Trump gets in, those who depend on that. Yes, we are screwed. Absolutely screwed. Because Trump is going to go after those entitlement programs. Why is he going to go after them? Because the other Republicans want him to. If he was left alone, he probably wouldn't care about them. He probably would not go against them as long as he gets his. But Mitch McConnell and the Republican conservatives in the Senate, it's a religion to go after them. And Trump will give them what they want in return for his getting what he wants. And Gloria says, I was sickened by Obama's actions during Standing Rock and Occupy Wall Street. Biden is in big with the corporations. I was sickened too. I completely condemn those, and I condemn those, and I agree Biden is in big with the corporations. But can we place some balance on different things? Obama never did anything that was as bad for the United States as what Trump has done with the coronavirus and with COVID, and what Trump has been doing right along with respect to the institutional structure of the United States. The institutional damage, the personnel damage, the moral damage, the COVID damage, the economic damage, all of that exceeds anything Obama did, anything Bush did. There was an article suggested to me by Deborah Wilson that appeared today. It was by by Euro Yankee, the Euro Yankee blog, Trump, Biden, and Choosing a Lesser Evil. And it tries to make the case that Trump is not the most dangerous president, in American history. It tries to make the case that Bernie, is wrong about that. And it does so. I'm not going to go through the article. It's an interesting article. But my overall assessment, of this article, is that even though a lot of the facts are true, especially in relation to what has gone before, the potential of these people to do harm based on their past history is not correctly evaluated in this article. Yes, Biden's current circle is a horror show. I agree with most of the facts, adduced by the article. What I don't agree with is that the article seems to engage in false equivalence in various ways. And it doesn't properly weight the harm that Donald Trump has done, the harm that Donald Trump has done, the harm that he will continue to do. If Donald Trump is reelected president, in spite of what has happened, he will go right on treating the coronavirus in exactly the way he's treating it. By the end of the year, as we have said, more people will die. More people will die. In the new year, more people will die. Trump is not going to start suddenly handing the coronavirus in a different way. People will die at high rates well into the new year. We could end up losing millions to the coronavirus, where we could have a quick end to the slaughter if we get a new administration into power. It's just not the same. I'm not going to argue with you and tell you Biden is not evil. I'm not going to argue with you and tell you that he's not in big with corporations. I'm not going to argue with you and tell you that he might not be even worse than Obama. All these things are true. He might be. All I'm arguing with you about is that nobody, including Obama or Biden, has done the damage to the United States that Donald Trump has done. I'm sorry, a choice is between Trump and Biden. I certainly did my best to avoid that particular choice, and I'm sure so did most of you. But the truth is, the American people did not pick up on this. They had a chance to go for Bernie, and with the help of rigging of elections and things like that, they went overwhelmingly to Biden. I mean, it wasn't all rigging. After Super Tuesday, they could have turned back to Bernie. They could have recognized that Bernie wanted to save them going out and braving the coronavirus, while Biden wanted them to keep on going out and voting and risking their lives. On those grounds alone, Bernie is the one they should have turned to. But they didn't. They didn't. They kept voting for Biden. Even when Bernie had only suspended his campaign but was still on the ballot, they kept going for Biden. They kept listening to the mass media that hates them and holds them in contempt. They kept watching that stuff. Steve says, I disagree. If Biden can't defend his ideas, he doesn't deserve the victory. What the fuck are we to elect? Okay, a dead person? Look, he may not be able to defend his ideas in the artificial setting of a one-on-one debate with somebody else. In the presidency, he's not going to have one-on-one debates with somebody else. There are going to be committee meetings with many people voicing views. And he will be making then final decisions. In that context, he may be perfectly all right. I mean, just because he's not able to answer Trump in a facile fashion, in a circumscribed sort of setting, okay, a one-on-one, does that mean that he doesn't actually deserve the victory? I mean, that's ridiculous. Just because he can't perform in a debate, he's therefore a dead person? He's shown enough on the campaign trail already in the talks that he's given. He isn't a dead person. He's not completely gone. He might not be the Joe Biden of 5 years ago or 6 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But he still seems to have enough wit there that he can sit in a committee meeting and listen to different people and weigh things for and against and make the final decisions. And as bad as the horror show that he's collecting around him is right now, and I agree, it's a horror show, does it compare with Trump's horror show? I mean, look at the guys Trump has around him. Look at the people Trump has around him. What is that about? That's about looting the government of the United States. That's about doing exactly what Trump wants all the time. There is not a person in that group who wants to do things in the interests of the United States. Steve Gonza says Biden's with Trump on Venezuela. I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think Biden's probably going to continue sanctions, okay, on Venezuela. He's probably going to try to mix in. He's probably going to try to make it tough for Venezuela. But I don't think Biden's going to start a war with Venezuela. I don't think he's going to send U.S. troops down to Venezuela. and jeopardize Democratic control of the Congress in 2023, I don't think Biden's going to do that. There's no way he's going to do that. I mean, besides, he's going to have enough to handle just with the mess in the Middle East. I mean, Netanyahu is going to want to get increasingly more aggressive. Biden's going to be called on to be supporting Netanyahu in the Middle East. He's not going to want to open up another front in Venezuela that could be more than the United States can handle. In all this time, the United States hasn't started a war with Cuba. Cuba has 11 million people on it. Now, we've had the economic sanctions on Cuba. We keep them going. We've hurt the Cuban economy very grievously, and the people have suffered because of us. But Venezuela has 33 million people, if I recall correctly. And they're well armed, and they're well organized. And they've got a social state that they like, and a party that they like. And they're set to defend their country against the United States. Do you think Biden's going to take on a war like that? Kay says, Rump wants a nuclear war. Oh, yeah, he may. He may. I don't think Biden's going to do that. Dolores Pierce says, true. I don't know what's true, but Kay says, Rump wants to kill off all of us old and vulnerable people. Yeah, he does. He's the only old and vulnerable person he doesn't want to kill. And who knows? He may want to kill himself too. Maybe what this is all about. And Steve says, but TDS can be serious. I keep an open mind. I don't trust Democrats anymore. I don't trust them anymore either. I mean, selecting Biden over Trump is not about trusting Democrats. It's not about trusting them at all. It's about holding Trump accountable for the horrible results of his presidency. Hundreds of thousands of Americans dead. The threat of fascist dictatorship hanging over our heads at any time. Institutions in disarray. Public morality gone. That's what it's about. We have to assess that damage, and we have to punish accordingly. Punish accordingly. Now, I didn't feel the same way in 2016. In 2016, I felt the Democrats should be punished accordingly. But by the same principle, it's the Republicans' turn. It's the Republicans' turn to get punished accordingly. Unfortunately, we didn't build our movement sufficiently to get another party in there that we could choose. That was our fault. And Kay says, exactly, Joe, I voted for Bernie in Ohio primary. I voted for Bernie here. Okay, and also Dolores says, not just Trump. The elites are looking to downsize the population. Kay says, I know that too, Dolores, but Rump will make it happen sooner. I can't give up the bit of Social Security I get now or I'll have nothing. Kay says, Cuban doctors are nominated for the freeze ride for their healths in this COVID crisis. Yes, they are. And you see my progressive short take on the Cuban doctors, I hope. Okay. That sort of covers things for tonight. I'll be back tomorrow with something else very, very significant. But I wanted you to be fully aware of what was in Dave's scenario article. I think this is one of the most important articles of the year. That's why I took There's so much time for it. So I'm going to end the broadcast now. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing. And I'll see you tomorrow night. And you have two short takes that you can watch now. And I'll have some others put up for you tomorrow as well. At least two. I have three others in reserve now already. I have not posted. And I will soon be going to more. Good night, Steve. You have a great night. Take care of yourself. Everybody take care of themselves. Have a great night.